Hello, hello, my friends. AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Welcome back to my face and my card making space and more ink smushing. It's just what I was in the mood to do. I love me some ink smushing. I actually do it two different ways for these cards. I was curious and I thought, why not? I've shown both ways in past videos, and yeah, in the end, it actually, like, you'll see when I do the process, like, they look very different, but in the end, they actually end up looking very, very similar. So it's just how you like to create, really. And again, I'm using Concord and Ninth inks, along with Simon Says Stamps Pawsitively Saturated inks. I've mentioned this a lot, that these inks play well together from the two different lines. The ink pads themselves, like the packaging and the actual ink pads, are pretty much the same. The formula, similar. I do not know, because I'm not privy to that information, but they work very similar. I cannot comment on other brands of ink. People have been asking me about them. I don't have any other brands other than, you guys can see I've got the distress inks, like the oxides and distress inks, obviously. And then I have Simon's original ink formula, which those are different. The Simon's original inks are not water reactive. So yeah, I use those for other things. They're wonderful for like blending and stuff, especially if you want to add things on top and not have the inks move. So that's those. But other than that, I don't have any other inks to compare. Yeah, I would love to. Don't know where I would put them. But I'm sure, like, any water reactive ink, because just because an ink calls itself water based doesn't mean it's water reactive. So you gotta find that out. But yeah, Concord's is water reactive. Simon's Pawsitively Saturated is water reactive. And like I've been saying, they complement each other in the whole color stories. Like Simon's, so far, very bright, vibrant colors. And then Concord's has a lot of like muted colors that just fit in nicely. So I have been enjoying it. So that is my very long-winded intro. I just thought I would address it while I'm talking to you guys. Yeah, and that's it for the moment. Just keep watching and I will show you guys these inky smushy goodness and how I made these cards. Okay, so classic ink smushing. Now, if you have distress inks or distress oxide inks, do you need other inks to do ink smushing? No. Oxides and distress inks, they're like the OG, the go-to, and they work beautifully for ink smushing and all the inky type techniques. I just like jumping around, doing different things, etc. The other thing, and I bring this up though because these two inks that I'm using, while they obviously work great for ink smushing, they have different additives in them, like ink formulas and the chemistry of it all. It just, there's a lot, but they have additives in these inks that make them smooth out. That's why they're so good for stamping. It also makes them wonderful for blending because of those additives. So I notice these things because I've been doing this a long time and this kind of stuff fascinates me. But regardless, it all works. It just different techniques, different ways, different things, different brands, different formulas. I know it can be overwhelming, but there's plenty of info and inspiration and all the things. And I'm just using what I love and having fun with it. So this is the original way to do ink smushing, like just as is. So I've got my non-stick craft sheet on here. This is the newer one from Tim Holtz. Mine is getting stained. I also think, I don't even know if I've used this craft sheet with actual distress inks yet. But anyway, these inks, I think because of the additives, like they seep into the fibers and it stains the craft sheet. It's fine. That's what it's meant for. I don't care. I'm just saying it will stain your tools, your things will get stained. It's just the nature of the project and the process and all things. Anyway, I did this the original way. So I smushed my ink pads directly on the craft sheet. I'm doing sort of a rainbow of colors. I broke out of my norm. Like usually I'm very specific with my rainbows, you know, my rainbows of colors have to have, you know, like all the specific colors. Trying to break out of that because rainbows can be all different colors. It's fun. So I used, and I'll have links to, I used Concord's Briar Rose, Clementine, and Honeycomb. And then I used Simon's Dublin, Tropic, and Surf. And I mushed all those colors directly onto my craft sheet in basically rainbow order. And then was pressing my watercolor paper. I'm using just Canson XL watercolor paper for this. And did the basic ink smushing. And the other thing to always remember is you need to dry between layers because wet on wet blends, wet on dry layers. So if you keep pressing your paper into it while everything is still wet, that's where you're going to get just a muddy, mucky mess. So if you dry between layers, that way you get all that fun, fleckly, speckly. I'm totally sounding like Tim Holtz, but honestly, how can you not? Watch his videos. He gives a bajillion different types of inspiration and product info and all the things, obviously with his distress line, but a lot of it can be applied to other products and other, you know, just take the inspiration and go from there. Although really you should have all the distress inks and the oxides. So just cuss. Anyway, the first one I did that standard, you know, smushing it directly onto. And honestly, like I haven't done that in so long and I loved it. It was actually, and it was the fastest. This second way, I've shown this in many ways as well. I'm just using a little piece of like packaging. I have like a storage sleeve I've used in a lot of videos. I honestly couldn't find it when I was filming this, so I just grabbed this. This works too. This way gives you more control because you can obviously see exactly where you are pressing your ink into. This takes a little bit more time because I'm doing like one color at a time. And I was also taking sometimes what was left over on there and I was pressing into the original piece. Just, again, to add those layers and the fleckly little bits because why not? And same rule. You need to dry between like your colors and layers and stuff because that's where you get all of that fabulous texture. This is also where I really noticed the difference in inks. Adding these inks to this acetate when I sprayed it, it doesn't bead up like distress inks. Again, it's those additives that make these inks so great for stamping and blending and all that sort of thing. But it's just interesting. But again, still works. I can still do ink smushing and get all these layers and textures. It's just, I just noticed the difference. So I went through and did these, and again the second piece took much longer because just doing each color at a time. However, you've got that control, you can go back in and just have fun with it. When doing stuff like this too, your paper somewhat matters. I've seen people use like full on just Nina cardstock, you know, and get neat results with this. So this is just again one of those techniques where you just got to play with it. Try different cardstocks, try different surfaces. I've talked about that a lot too. Like the craft sheet on the base here is one of my favorites because inks do, even these inks bead up on it. That's where you get that fabulous fun texture. And a glasswork surface, if I just smush my inks on there, you do not get the beading. And I've shown that in other videos. You'll spray the water and it just turns into a puddle. But that also can create, you know, fun effects. And then the cardstock you use can also change how things work, how the inks will blend and layer. But again, just play with it. This is just one of the funnest things to do, honestly. Switch up the colors, switch up just different little things. The cardstock you use, switch up your surfaces, experiment, see what works for you, see what you like. It's fun and it's always different. Even if you use the exact same colors, the exact same paper, the exact same surface, it's still not going to be the same. And that's the joy of it, really. Honestly, I could do this all day, every day and still, you know, look forward to it and have fun with it. Also, if you want, you can wear some nitrile gloves or whatever if you don't want to get your fingers like really filthy. Because it gets everywhere. I don't have a problem with it. I don't really care. I wash my hands so often that it all comes off by the end of the day anyway. But I showed there, you could see in the end, even though I did 2 different ways with those inks, it looks very similar in the end. So just do what works for you. And I switch back and forth depending on my mood, depending on what I can find in my space. You know, all the things. So after I was done those backgrounds, I let them dry. And then I die cut them with Simon Says Stamp's Billow Butterfly Plate. Love it. So I did that. I set them aside. I kept all the butterflies, you know, from the background as well. You can see them piled up there. And then I also die cut scraps of white cardstock and then Simon's matte gold cardstock with the Holding Space for You wafer die. That's going to be my main like sentiment on these cards. So that die also has an outline, which you can see there on screen. I didn't use the outline. I just used the words. And I like this one a lot because everything's connected. And again, it's one of those things that just depends on my mood. Sometimes I'm in the mood for finicky, you know, fiddly little die cuts that are all the things. And then other times I'm like, I want the simplest thing possible. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to have to fiddle. Hence me using that one. And then on the inside of my card bases are going to be top folding A2 white note cards. I'm using another sentiment from the Here For You stamp set that I have been loving. And I inked it up, the stamp I chose, I inked up with Honeybee's gold pigment ink and stamped that onto the inside of both of these cards. And then I'm going to let that dry. And I did end up actually blasting that with my heat tool as well, just to dry it. And then to adhere those backgrounds to the card front, I'm using Waffle Flowers foam strips. And you could totally turn these into shaker cards, like this background plate. As I was doing this, I was like, oh, I could have backed this with acetate. I could have turned these into shakers. Like I was thinking about it, but I had other plans in mind. And at the moment as I was making these, I was just not in the mood to make a shaker, even though, yes, I have 5+ lifetimes worth of bling and shaker bits and all the things. Like I could make shaker cards all day, every day for the next, again, 5 lifetimes, I'm sure, and still be good. But just wasn't in the mood. So instead, I just used the foam tape. I wanted these popped up. Another option is you could just die cut scraps, like big scraps of like white cardstock or whatever, and back this and skip the foam tape. But one, I love Waffle Flowers foam tape. Oh, love it. These little strips are just perfect. You guys see me use them in like every video. But I wanted these popped up with foam because it gives that little extra like kind of shadow element behind everything. And it's just something. It's very subtle, but I like that look. So I used the foam tape. I used the thinner foam tape, and that's what I'll link to, but there's 2 thicknesses of this, plus it comes in black. Again, it's been in a ton of my videos. But pop that on. It covers the whole card base, as you can see, and it's just lovely. And then I put these into my splat box, and of course I'm going to add splatter. That's why I didn't do shakers, because I wanted the splatter not only on the ink smushy background, but I was like, ooh, if I put this on the card base, the splatter will also go on like the actual card base, like on the white portions of the butterflies. And I was like, oh, how fun is this? So that's what won in my thought process making these. Splatter is always going to win. Y'all know that. So Gansai Tombi Starry Colors, the gold, my fan brush, my splat box, and a ton of splatter just all over these cards. Love. So I did all of that, let that dry, and then I took a couple of the leftover butterflies from those backgrounds, and I'm going to adhere those onto the inside of the card. That's why I stamped the sentiment kind of off to the right a little bit, and then just stuck a couple of those in there. And then off camera also, I die cut the Billow butterfly plate. I just die cut some scraps of white cardstock to get a couple of white butterflies, because I was going to use the ink blended smushy ones as well, but they just kind of blend into the background no matter what and don't really stand out. So the white cardstock ones just stood out a little bit without being too distracting. And shockingly, I know, I didn't add any bling. I thought about it, but it wasn't necessary. These are one of the few times, I know, one of the few times where I was like, no, I could have, again, I've got every possible iteration of bling and I'll continue to get it because you guys know I love it. But I was happy with this. It just, the splatter and the dimension, the gold sentiment, everything. This is where it all needed to be. So Hopefully all of this makes sense, my rambling thoughts on ink smooshing and types of inks and all the things. Like I mentioned earlier, I will have links below the video. I will link to my blog post in the blog post. It's pictures, there's picture links, everything easy to navigate. That'll be linked directly below the video, along with the supply list will also be directly below the video with links to everything, links to my social medias as well. You just got to expand the description box to find it all. Thank you guys so very much for taking the time to watch my videos, for thumbs upping and commenting and letting the robot overlords know you like what you see. Subscribe if you haven't. I'd love to have you, and I will see you all very soon in the next one. Bye.